All right, let's kick this off. Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Mark Dahlmeyer. I will be the host and facilitator for this Mastering IT and Cybersecurity series. First part of the LinkedIn Live series is Ransomware and Zero Trust, brought to you by Exceptional and Zadara. Here's the session structure. We're going to do some guest introductions. We have some phenomenal guests and experts on the stream with us. We're going to talk about some of the cybersecurity and compliance and risk trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. We're going to talk about ransomware and zero trust. We're going to walk through some real world examples and situations that we're seeing in the marketplace. We're going to talk about ransomware and zero trust best practices. And then we're going to do some wrap up and Q&A. So this is designed to be a very interactive session. And with that, we'll do some introductions. Again, my name is Mark Dahlmeyer. I'm the host and facilitator. I'm a 25-year industry veteran and a researcher of cybersecurity risk and IT trends. I've been the CSO and CMO for various cybersecurity risk and compliance companies, as well as MSPs and MSSPs. With me today from Zadara is expert Noam Shendar. Noam, why don't you provide the audience with a little bit about your background?
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everybody. I'm Noam Shendar. I run Zadara's global solution architecture team, also a 25-year veteran of the industry with a background in cloud and semiconductors and storage and consumer technologies.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And joining us from DLT, which is a tech data company, is industry expert Don McLean. Don, why don't you provide the audience with a little bit about your background and what you've been working on?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Mark. I am Chief Cybersecurity Technologist with DLT, a tech data company, which has also recently merged with Synex, but we're still working on a new name. So we're sticking with DLT, a tech data company for now. And in that capacity, we essentially are middlemen. We help companies sell into the federal government. And so in that capacity, I help cybersecurity technology vendors communicate their value prop to the government, to government customers, and we work with them on go-to-market strategies. I won't bore you with all the letters after my name, except what's relevant perhaps for this session is that I am a CMMC registered practitioner and also a Zero Trust Extended Strategist under the Forrester certification granted by Forrester.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, Don, and thank you, Noam. Appreciate you guys investing time with us today. So let's talk about some trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. This should be no surprise to anybody, but the federal government's reporting over the last 12 to 18 months, significant growth in terms of data breaches, data incidents, and cybersecurity incidents that they're tracking. So as of May 15th of this year, over 6 million complaints have been filed with the IC3. What's interesting is we've seen over 600% growth in cyber-related attacks. Ransomware has become pervasive, a pervasive and aggressive and negative disruptive force globally across all market sectors. Some industries, according to the Chubb Cybersecurity Index, have seen anywhere between 200% and 3,000% increases in cyber attacks and incidents over the last 36 months. Since January of this year, there have been over 1 billion records breached and lost and being sold on the dark web. And ransomware as a service and extortion is escalating. So we're starting to see ransomware gangs and groups and cyber criminals extort, ransom, and really aggressively pursue some unique extortion techniques to get money out of their victims, including threatening to call the ransomware victims' customers, business partners, bankers, financiers. And so what's interesting about that is not only is ransomware and the attacks and the breaches increasing in frequency and in damages, but now they're actually extorting money out of these poor victims. So we're seeing a lot of escalation. At the same time, globally, across all industry sectors, we see a significant glut of technology vendors and solution providers entering the market. So when you walk the big shows like RSA, DEF CON, Black Hat, etc., you're seeing a significant number of new technology and new service vendors entering the cybersecurity market. There are now thousands of vendors, and organizations and customers are actually becoming confused in terms of what solutions they should be deploying in order to defend and protect themselves and to address the data privacy regulations that regulators are trying to enforce. So they're seeking simplified solutions. At the same time, these organizations have a large amount of technical debt. A lot of organizations are dealing with old or fragile IT systems that are holding their business back. And lastly, regulatory oversight and laws are increasing. 67% of companies surveyed expect regulatory costs to grow over the next 12 to 24 months. With the advent of GDPR, CCPA, the New York regulation, as well as CMMC, as Don mentioned earlier. Actually, in the US today, there are at least 21 different states that have some level of state level data privacy regulation, or they are in the process of implementing and passing some new type of law or regulation around data privacy. So what does this mean? This is a huge tsunami of activities, of attacks, and trends that we're seeing in the marketplace today. And that's why ransomware and zero trust are top of mind for many organizations. So what Don and I are going to attempt to do is to frame out what is ransomware. So I will go ahead and kick this off, and then I'll ask Don to actually provide some of his perspective and his feedback, being a chief cybersecurity architect and expert. So, well, what is ransomware? Ransomware is a form of malware. It's a software that is developed for nefarious and malicious purposes. Ransomware can also be related to a family of malicious software that might have different variants or various family members that are developed for different malicious purposes. That and keep in mind, ransomware has successfully impacted and penetrated all industries globally. Ransomware code bases and families and variants are constantly evolving code bases that have been used to create ransomware as a service. Ransomware as a service is a for fee or a for percentage service that you can subscribe to on the dark web, whereby cyber criminals and cyber groups will actually develop ransomware on your behalf, uh, target organizations or databases with the ransomware on your behalf, and then collect the cryptocurrency based upon the ransoms, based upon the success, and then distribute the proceeds from that in a revenue share with you. So at this point in time, you don't even need to be an engineer, a hacker. All you need is malicious intent and access to the dark web and cryptocurrency to actually facilitate a launch of a ransomware attack against an organization. And this is where ransomware and this is where and how and why ransomware has become pervasive as one of the predominant attack vectors in the industry that we're seeing. What ransomware is not. Ransomware is not slowing down. It's not going away anytime soon. There are hundreds of different families and variants of ransomware that are being developed, have been developed, and are continually being developed. Ransomware is not just a single attack. So ransomware is often embedded and bundled in exploit kits along with other malicious code, viruses, and malware. And ransomware is not undefeated, meaning it can be defended against. Don, from your perspective, what have we left out? Are there any other ways to describe what ransomware is and what it is not from your perspective?
Well, I think one of the major things that you want to consider with regard to ransomware is the goal of the attacker. Are they trying to encrypt your data and have they stolen your data and they've encrypted it and preventing you access to your data? Are they inhibiting your operations? IoT ransomware is a huge deal. If they've encrypted your data, obviously it's an urgent situation, but perhaps not quite as urgent as, let's say, a hospital whose operations are have to be kept alive minute by minute. So the biggest thing I would say with regard to ransomware, though, is to be prepared. That's true of any incident response capability, but in particular ransomware. You have to know in advance, make your decisions in advance what you're going to do. Most observers would agree that it's not a good idea to pay the ransom, because even if you do, there's no guarantee by any means that they're going to give you access or cease their operation. But you don't want to be trying to wrestle with that decision in the midst of a crisis. So decide in advance whether you're going to pay the ransom. I'd recommend you don't, but if you do, you might want to have a cryptocurrency account available if that's what you choose to do. Again, not recommending that. Also, I've had great success with all kinds of incident response with gamification. In other words, people don't want to think, it's unpleasant to think about these crises. It's unpleasant to do desktop exercises. It pulls people away from their quote unquote real work. But I've had great success with gamifying that process, turn it into a game, pit two teams against each other in a simulated ransomware situation. Who gets back online first? Okay, what did you do right that helped you win the game? Do you want to do it again? We've actually had that situation in some. I've actually had people ask to do an incident response exercise a second time because they were the losing team. By God, they wanted to win, right? That's like saying, let's do that fire drill all over again because that was so much fun, right? So the number one thing is to be prepared. Recognize what's most critical about your organization that ransomware is going to be most inhibiting or is going to hurt you the most. Are you a hospital where your IoT operations are critical? Do you have highly sensitive data? Say you're a government contractor, is the kind of people that I work with a lot, where the data is absolutely central. Or is it something like, say, Facebook, which when I first heard about it, I thought, boy, that's a heck of a ransomware attack. And then it turned out to be a self-inflicted wound. But know in advance what you're going to do, plan it, exercise it, run through it. And of course, have backups of all your systems and data to the extent possible. And be prepared for, as you would with any incident response, but in particular ransomware, because unlike other cybersecurity attacks, it's noisy and wants it to make its presence felt, whereas other ransomware, cybersecurity attacks are oriented around being stealthy. So,
Don, I think that's fantastic, sage advice. And I think you laid the groundwork for the next topic, which is, what is zero trust? So, Don, no, what I'd like you guys to do, talk through what is zero trust. So what is it and what is it not? Don, you want to kick this off?
well, sure. It is definitely a philosophy and a set of principles. It is not a means to an end. In other words, it's a way of looking at security. I think that we've all realized by now that what we're doing in cybersecurity isn't truly working. The bad actors are continuously, winning, as we saw from all the criminal statistics and complaints, and the perpetual rise of successful, from the attacker's perspective, attacks. So we need to take a step back and take a comprehensive look at how we're going to do security. I think the biggest thing that I like to see, or what I would like to see more of in zero trust, is to define the problem space. Exactly what problems are we trying to solve? And also, I would say don't be don't adhere slavishly to some sort of framework. There are many frameworks out there from the government and in private industry. Pick one to guide your efforts, but if there's something missing that you think is important, do that too. For instance, the NIST guidelines from National Institute of Standards and Technology doesn't really talk about encrypting data much, which to me is pretty important element of a zero trust program, that sort of thing. So, but I've already yacked enough about ransomware and zero trust, so I'll step aside and let someone else have a turn.
Sounds good. This is great. What I'd like to add is that the plugging into what Don was saying is that it should not be such a rigid approach that it makes access impossible. At the end of the day, we need to run our businesses, and there's a balance between full security. I go back to my electronics days. I made a mistake in a project and created accidentally a WOM, a write-only memory. Well, the write-only memory is incredibly secure because no one can get access to what's in it. It's also absolutely useless because you can't get access to what's in it. So don't build a WOM. It's not going to help anybody. Balance access with security. Plan ahead, and also think about where sensitive data should be, and maybe not all of it needs to be online all the time. And we can touch on that point later, but assume that data is going to leak because there is no such thing as a perfect moat. So what these attackers often do, because they know that we don't necessarily want to pay, and because they listen to the advice of people like Don, they say, well, we have a problem here. If the target won't pay, how do we make them? And what they do is, before the encrypted data, they steal the data. And now they threatened to release the data to the public. That's as a means of extortion. So think about what data might be stolen that is sensitive, that you wouldn't want the public to see, and either make a plan for what to do about it if that data is stolen and somebody's threatening to release it, and also think about, is there some of it data that can be aged out and put in an offline medium so that it's accessible to you if you need it, but it's not accessible to an attacker?
I think that's a really great point. And one of the recent research reports from the IC3 tracked and identified the percentage of encrypted data through ransomware attacks that was actually still leaked and sold on the dark web, and I believe it was north of 70%. So to your point, you might feel compelled to pay, but the reality is, right, even before you find yourself in that situation, go through the process of identifying what the crown jewels are within your organization. What is the data that holds your organization value, right? So is it customer data? Is it customer records? Is it confidential data? Is it top secret information, right? In the case of federal contractors, is it credentials? Are you looking to protect credentials for third-party systems, your own back-end systems, et cetera, bank accounts, those types of things? So go through the process of identifying what are your crown jewels that you're trying to protect. Sometimes it's intellectual property, trade secrets, right? Patents, things like that, that you're trying to protect. And then think through what's your process around data privacy, around data security, and then what would you do in the event of this type of attack? I think from a zero trust perspective, a lot of organizations that we speak to, and this is true with the ransomware side as well, a lot of organizations are trying to figure out, okay, well, what can I buy to solve this problem? How do I make the bad man stop? And can't I just buy a new piece of software or a new appliance or a solution? And can't I just pay money to make this problem go away? And so what I'd like, as we go through the conversation, Don and Noam, is for you gentlemen to talk about that question. Because from a ransomware perspective, you're starting to see the next generation endpoint detection and response technologies come out, right? That are anti-ransomware, anti-malware, and you're also seeing some level of managed services being provided in the marketplace. From a zero trust perspective, there's a wide and broad portfolio of solutions and technologies that you could deploy, as well as services. to facilitate that zero trust. But here, so as we go through this discussion, gentlemen, if you could maybe talk about some of those different options and some of the different approaches that organizations are using. These are real world conversations that we have on a daily basis. When we talk to executives and organizations across the nation, they're talking about growth. They're focused on geographic expansion, and they're focused on resiliency, making sure that they can grow in a scalable and repeatable and predictable way, but also making sure that their business and their systems and their operations are resilient. We also see organizations looking to control or contain spending. They want some level of predictability and visibility in terms of their IT and their operating spending. And they want to enhance employee and customer engagement and employee productivity. I think we've seen a lot of reports over the last 18 months coming out of COVID, where we've seen organizations looking for these types of solutions because they're trying to figure out new and innovative ways to meet the buyer where the buyer and the decision maker is at, and meet their customers where they're at, because customer buying processes and preferences have changed. And they're also looking to enhance and make sure that employees are engaged because of the talent shortage that many of us and many industries are facing. Organizations are also looking to rapidly respond to shifts in the marketplace, as we just saw, or they're looking for technologies and services that will help them pivot. And at the same time, they're looking to architect or re-architect IT systems and IT services. So those IT systems and services now are aligned to their current business goals and objectives, which for a lot of organizations have changed dramatically over the last 18 months. So here are some of the IT and systems use cases that we see around these. Repatriation. So any organization that's focused on growth, expansion, and resiliency, they're trying to figure out how to migrate systems or data between clouds, data center, co-locations, right? Because they have to make sure that the data is accessible as they grow and scale the organization, and it's accessible to the right people at the right time, or it's accessible by the right customers at the right time. In terms of controlling and containing spending, there's a lot of organizations that are moving towards a utility-based consumption model. So they're trying to figure out how to move from investing in IT and IT services from a capital expenditure perspective to an operating expense perspective. So they're trying to figure out how do they model compute storage as a service, and they're looking at IT as a service offerings. In terms of enhancing employee and customer engagement, and then driving employee productivity, a lot of organizations from an IT perspective are focused on edge and latency. So they need cloud services that can burst, that can scale, and also that are closer to the end users or customers geographically. So it's not enough to just be able to drop your applications in your infrastructure in a colo and set it and forget it. Now, with the changing dynamics in the marketplace, and with distributed workforces, and with organizations that are servicing consumers that are sometimes global, right? You're looking for a global footprint, some type of global IT or distributed IT and application system or communication system for your employees. A lot of organizations, as they're trying to respond to market needs and pivot their business, they're seeking localized or regional partnerships. So they need that knowledge and that infrastructure, that capability regionally. So they're trying to figure out from a data center, from a cloud, from a serving applications to customers and employees, what's the best way to go about doing that? And then also, as organizations are looking to re-architect, right, and get rid of some of that technical debt that we talked about, where they're looking to re-architect IT, maybe they're looking to modernize their communication, their collaboration platforms, or their core infrastructure and back office applications. They're needing to keep IT resources current at a reduced cost. But the reality is, in IT and in cybersecurity, there's a growing talent shortage within the industry. So what I'd like Noam to do is talk a little bit about Zadara's experience around these different IT use cases and these business situations. And Noam, maybe you can kind of walk us through what your experiences are and how some of your customers have addressed these needs while they're still trying to address their defense and protection against ransomware and move more towards a zero trust infrastructure and architecture.
Absolutely. The the first thing to think about is that the assumption that the cloud is relatively small number of distant sites is is actually is actually not true. It's a myth. So I'd love to bust that myth right here. And once we bust it, a lot of these things here fall into place, both in terms of the security risks that we talked about, in terms of the even larger business trends that Mark just walked through. Let me paint the following picture. The world does not have to be a world that's controlled by a very small number of very large clouds, if you will, an oligopoly of clouds. In fact, the situation is much better. There are services available that are cloud services, but they're available at the edge. And what that means is a best of all worlds, because they're still cloud services. They're available on demand. They're available with a consumption business model, and they are comprehensive. They have compute services, they have networking services, they have storage services, and of course they have the security envelope that's both wrapped around it and, in the spirit of zero trust, actually embedded in each offering within these edge clouds. And those edge clouds can reside at, and they do reside, both at nearby locations around the world, including as offered by Exceptional and powered by Zadara. They're also available on premises. So our partners like Exceptional are able to offer those services as a private edge cloud inside an environment that you as a consumer of these services either own or rent. It doesn't matter, but the physical environment that you control. So you see that when you do that, a number of things get solved. One is that you're no longer locked into those very large providers who are quite rigid in their approach, not particularly customizable, and not particularly consistent in terms of the performance because of the sharing of resources across a very large number of customers. So what you get is a choice, and by the way, you get to maintain the same API compatibility as you see here on the top right. So you're not giving up compatibility, which is a really nice plus. Moving down the list, you do get full OpEx, even though it's at the edge or even inside your own facility. The business model is still a by the hour business model. So going with an edge offering does not mean giving up the flexibility of the cloud. Quite to the contrary, you gain flexibility versus the cloud, which is a point I'll get to shortly. You also get a location of your choice. If you look at a Zadara map of locations, there are more than 400 locations globally. That's a large number by inspection. To put it further in perspective, Amazon only has 19 locations worldwide. So it's 20 times more locations. And it both means locations that are close to wherever you are here in the US, and, for example, covering the Midwest, which is not covered by companies like AWS, but also a global footprint in many countries in Europe, in Asia, in Australia, New Zealand, in Africa. There are locations in South Africa and in Nigeria, for example. So that means latency, and it also means where your data lives. We don't hide that because of the zero trust model, we're not counting on obscurity of location in order to keep things secure. So we'll give you the address if you'd like it. Because again, it's not about the hiding the address. It's about multiple layers of security, and not assuming that there's just one big gate at the front. The next point is really, really important. This is the opposite of the faceless corporation. This is a service offered by local partners who are available, who are responsive, who are experts in their fields and experts in the local market, and who answer the phone when you call. So there's not a read the friendly manual kind of response. There's not a faceless support that when there's a problem that you get a response that, yep, we checked and yes, the problem did happen. It's not happening anymore, so enjoy your day. There's somebody to talk to in real time who takes care of you, and gives you full transparency into what is happening. That is a big deal. We need to be able to sleep soundly at night knowing that somebody's minding the store, and this is it. The local partner is that entity who helps you sleep well at night. And then the refresh. You have no control in the hyperscale cloud over what technology is deployed and how often it's refreshed, and you don't know when it's refreshed, even when it is. It's done behind the scenes. It's done in secret, and it's done on a schedule that is not transparent and not known. It doesn't have to be that way. With a true edge cloud approach, the refresh is at your control. Whatever technology you need is the technology that gets deployed in better yet, it's 100% on the fly. So it is possible, and we do this on a weekly basis. There's right now, as I speak, an upgrade going on of a major cloud in Japan that we operate with 60 petabytes of capacity, and it's being done online. And this cloud is a mission critical cloud running behind to protect the innocent, is a consumer facing service that is being used by millions of consumers. Any hiccup will be visible to millions of consumers. And we're doing this technology refresh on the fly, non-disruptively, 100% live, because keeping the technology fresh is a question of reliability. It's a question of efficiency, and to tie it all together, it's a question of security. Zero trust evolves every day and every week and every month, and it's important to keep up with it and not to say, well, we bought the hardware a year ago, it won't depreciate for another 3 years, so sorry, you got what you got. It's not our approach, and it's not the right approach.
Fantastic. That's great perspective, Noam. I appreciate you walking through that. And I'm going to probably just build out and fast track this slide, but these are some of the core building blocks that we see organizations deploy as they're looking to move towards a zero trust model, or they're looking to enhance or advance their cyber hygiene and their cybersecurity posture to defend and protect themselves against ransomware and some of these other attacks. A lot of organizations are building out programs based upon key data privacy and data protection principles. So they're deploying some type of security operations center, some type of SIM, security information and event monitoring and management platform. They're looking at deploying new data privacy, maybe data privacy vaults, or some other type of data privacy program. They're educating their people. So they're going through the process of not just once a quarter or once a year security education training and awareness, but they're doing this on a monthly and an ongoing basis with phishing simulations, competitions. They're doing tabletop exercises around how to recover from a business email compromise attack or a ransomware attack. But they're getting all levels of their employees engaged in data protection and in data privacy and protecting the intellectual property of the organization. They're also launching more formal vulnerability management programs. So consistent scanning, consistent patching, implementing a life cycle program around vulnerability management. And so they're focused on patching and scanning. And then lastly, they're trying to figure out the password situation, right? There are a lot of password vaults. There's password-less processes, technologies, platforms that are being implemented and tested in the marketplace today. But a lot of organizations are still struggling with what are they going to be using for passwords before they make the leap and they move away from passwords. And then lastly, a lot of organizations, and this is a checklist that we've been putting together for the last couple of years, these are some of the typical things that organizations do to defend and protect themselves against ransomware, again, as they're moving towards a zero trust model. We talked about the security operations center, the SIM, scanning, logging, monitoring. Most organizations are moving their backups off network and to the cloud. Why? Because, well, within modern ransomware attacks, one of the first things that the ransomware is designed to do is to encrypt the backups. If they're on network and accessible on network, you have a problem. So limit and lock down administrative and system access, control read and write, limit and block network access. So these are some of the technical things that organizations are doing. Most organizations on the business side are also looking to update their business continuity and disaster recovery plans and their solutions. So we've been giving this presentation for years, and oftentimes in a virtual setting or in a live setting, we'll ask for a show of hands. How many people have a business continuity and disaster recovery plan, right? The majority of the hands go up. Then you ask, how many of you have tested the plan? About half the hands go down. And then you ask, how many of you have updated those plans with how you would respond to a business email compromise attack or a ransomware attack? 90% of the hands go down. So this is a key recommendation, is if you have emergency response plans, disaster recovery, business continuity plans, make sure that you're planning for ransomware, for business email compromise, phishing, or social engineering attacks. Here's a checklist of things that most high-performing organizations that have rock-solid security and compliance programs, this is a checklist of things that they ask themselves, right? We ensure that their internal security and IT departments and teams understand the short-term, mid-term, long-term business goals and objectives and priorities. I'm not going to read all of these, but these are great food for thought. I'm going to stop there and pause, and I'm going to ask Chris. Hey, Chris. Chris is the CEO and founder of Exceptional, another 20-year veteran. Chris has been manning the chat room. Chris, do we have any questions around zero trust, around ransomware, or around any of the topics that we've covered this far in the session?
Yeah, so in the comment section, there's a couple of questions about backups and backup strategies and how do you protect from ransomware, and what are the key components of that. And basically, I shot back an answer: yes, immutability, air gapping those backups is the way to protect against ransomware. And the follow-up question was, well, what about encryption? And the answer to that was, well, encryption's great, security is great, as long as the keys and/or the usernames and passwords are kept secret. But if all else fails, air-gapped or immutable backups are the way to protect even against administrative error or administrative deletion, as well as malicious deletion. And then I pasted into the comment section a Zadara white paper basically on using Zadara and Veeam, which we happen to do for our customers as well, to set up not only encrypted but also immutable backups.
Fantastic. And I think that sets the table for this slide. Noam, do you want to take a couple of minutes and walk through data protection, data backups, just around that context, and then walk us through what this slide is communicating?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that question sets this up perfectly. So this is a concept that came from Veeam, and in the which is a partner of ours, and we're a partner of theirs. The one thing to note is that this too is an evolving slide. I have seen two prior iterations of this slide, and that's part of the evolving zero trust thought process. This used to be called the 3-2-1 slide, and then it became the 3-2-1-1. and then it became the 32110 slide. So let me walk through that. The 3 is that you need 3 different copies of the data. This is, if you want to have a zero trust model around your backups, you should follow this rule of thumb. And if you follow this rule of thumb, you're in very, very good shape to absorb and recover from almost any mishap that happens, whether it's accidental or malicious. So have 3 different copies of your data, of which at least 2 are in different media, meaning that there could be different media. Could mean a primary storage array and an object store. It could mean disk versus tape. There are different ways to implement it. But the point is not the same, so that a failure that affects one would not affect the other. And again, that failure, I mean that broadly, could be a problem, a spontaneous problem, or a human caused problem, accidental or malicious. One of those 3 copies, right? So we have 3 different copies. At least 2 of those copies should be across at least 2 different media. At least one of those copies needs to be off-site. Why? For disaster reasons, floods, fires, tornadoes, whatever it is. I'm in California, earthquakes, obviously. So keep at least one of those off-site and far enough away off-site that a disaster affecting the primary site cannot possibly affect the other site. The gold standard in the US is 1,000 miles. Not all countries have the luxury of having 1,000 miles inside their borders, but we do. So other countries sometimes have to go across an international border to store a second copy of the data. So remember, originally we were 321, we stopped here. But over time, as the zero trust thinking has evolved, there are additional things that came to be important. For example, ransomware is responsible for this red number 1, which is at least one of those copies needs to be immutable or air-gapped. Why? Because it can't be encrypted if it's immutable or air-gapped. So it's safe from the traditional ransomware approach. It cannot be encrypted, cannot be deleted, right? And so both of those are important. And by the way, immutable and air-gapped at the same time, even better, right? So why not be paranoid and put on 2 locks rather than 1? And then the last one is also, the 0 is also a zero trust kind of thinking, which is don't assume that all of those copies are going to be good. If you have a copy that's not usable, then it's not doing you any good. So those 3 copies, minimum 3 copies, each has to be verifiably usable. So don't trust that it's usable, test that it's usable. And if you follow this 32110 approach, you are extremely well protected against a whole list of bad things happening.
That's awesome. And I think again, the question teed up that last slide, and that last slide tees up this more technical architecture slide. But if you would, Noam, can you walk through backing up the data with Veeam equates to ransomware prevention and also detection and its proactive security approach? But maybe you can just kind of walk us through from left to right and down to the bottom, like what the logic flow of this slide is communicating.
Yeah, so the slide is communicating a few thoughts. One is that every type of storage that's needed for this 32110 approach is provided by Zadara. So whether it's the primary storage, which is on the top left, and that's the main copy of the data that's being used day by day, moment by moment, all the way through the offsite immutable copy, all of those different types of storage are provided by Zadara as a unified service. So the slide communicates convenience, but in addition to that, it communicates flexibility and customization around implementing the 32110 approach. I'll give a couple of examples. If you look at the top right, you have a performance tier. So you have your primary storage, and then you have copies of the data that are backed up to a performance tier, which is an on-site block storage array. What that means is that's a rapid restore. Something happens in the primary storage, again, accidental or malicious or hardware failure, whatever it is, the performance tier can sub for the primary storage, can be quickly recovered from. That's a rapid recovery medium. What the performance tier is not is particularly cost effective because it's optimized for performance. So you probably also want to be thinking about a cost-effective, what's called a capacity tier. So if you look at both the middle of the slide and the bottom of the slide, both of those are capacity tiers. Those are object stores. They're very straightforward devices. They're very reliable, but also very, very cost effective. And one of them is on-site, and one of them is off-site. And actually, both could be off-site. So the middle one is actually the 32110. It actually implements all of the recommendations on a single tier. And then there is a block array offsite at the very bottom that's also capacity optimized. That's another point around flexibility that even the block solution does not have to be expensive necessarily. It can be optimized for either performance, which is going to increase performance at some cost, and then it could be a capacity tier, same technology, but with different settings, which can be changed on the fly. Remember my point earlier, 100% on the fly, can be changed on the fly to become a capacity tier, much more cost effective. The trade-off is less performance, and it's probably okay. If you're down to your third and last copy, it's unlikely that you'll need it, so you probably don't want to pay the full rack rate for that third copy, and you're probably willing to trade off some performance in order to recover from the capacity tier. Everything that you see here again is under a single umbrella, but each is independent. So each of those things you see here is not under a single lock and key. Back to Don's point about the single moat, there's not a single moat around these things. These are all their own separate credentials, separate fault domains, separate locations, and obviously if they can be 1,000 miles or more apart.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for walking through that. I'm going to pivot back to Chris. Chris, any other questions from the attendees or the audience?
Let's see here. I think I had one. So there's a question in chat. I was a bit confused by the 32110. Are Zadara services cloud or private services?
Oh, yeah, that's a great clarifying question. Thank you for that. The answer is yes. It's to all of the above, and it's one of the unique aspects and one of the most powerful aspects of what we do and what we do together with Exceptional is these services can be provided and are provided anywhere that you need them, including in multiple locations at once. So if you're interested in a hosted service at an edge location, for example, you got that. You're interested in an on-premises service inside an environment that you own or control, you got that. You want to do a hybrid approach. Some of your data here, some of your data there, or full copy here, full copy there. We do that as well. You have the choice and you have the ability to change. Remember our mantra, 100% on the fly. You're actually able to, over time, change your strategy based on the evolving understanding of zero trust.
Chris, do you have any other questions? I know I get asked a number of questions, and I can pose to Don and Noam their perspective and their answer to the question. If you don't have another one to share.
Do not have any more in chat, so go for it.
Okay, so Don, Noam, one of the questions that I get asked all the time is, hey, we understand that the attacks and the threats are growing. We understand that ransomware is a big deal. We also know that there's probably a better way for us to create business and IT resiliency around this thing that we're hearing about, zero trust. Where do we begin? Like, what are the first couple of steps that I need to go through in order to start moving in this direction? And I know you guys are going to have some different answers because you have different perspectives on this, but Don, how would you answer that question?
Well, my perspective is largely from federal government because that's where I spent my career. But I mean, I think it's broadly applicable to any organization, which is, first of all, I would say, start with a problem statement. What problems are you trying to solve? This is something I've studied all these models from the government and from private industry, And I've yet to see one that actually lays out, here's the problems that we are trying to solve with this massive framework. So step one is with any engineering problem, define your problem, right? Einstein supposedly said, and I don't know if it's true or not, but the point is relevant anyway, that if he had an hour to save the world, he had to solve a problem in an hour to save the world, he'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes actually solving it. I don't know that, obviously take that with a grain of salt, but that's the basic idea. So first of all, what problems are you really trying to solve? Number two, look at the various frameworks and take what you value from those and use it, and don't feel obliged to slavishly adhere to any specific framework. Step three is look at where your zero trust program overlaps with or leaves out compliance requirements. For instance, I mentioned earlier that some of these zero trust frameworks don't emphasize encryption in place very much, but you might have a PCI DSS requirement that requires you to do encryption. So if you go to your board and your CEO and say, look what we did, we're all zero trust, but where's the encryption? Oops, forgot about that. In other words, these frameworks are good approaches. Google Beyond Core, there's the framework from the NIST. The NSA, the Department of Defense, has put out guidance on all this. There's also the commercial programs such as Gartner's CARTA and Forrester's Zero Trust Extended, etc. But none of them is really perfect and complete and may not fit your requirements entirely. So define the problem, figure out the model that you want to use, but don't adhere to it slavishly, and make sure that what you're doing with zero trust jives properly with your compliance requirements. And then last but not least, understand that a zero trust program is a massive undertaking with significant cultural impact. If you're changing out technology, that could very well meet with resistance from people whose careers are oriented around that technology. Or if you're restricting privileges from people because they're not necessary to do their job. Well, I've done that before, and trust me, it's not fun. People like to have privileges even when they don't need them because it makes them feel important. So I would say those are the four major things, places to start with the zero trust program. So.
Fantastic feedback and insight. Thank you, Don. And those last three the last three that you mentioned, I think if organizations don't have that in-house expertise, right, my recommendation around that would be seek counsel from those that have been there and that have done that and helped organizations go through, looking at the frameworks, analyzing, right, the plan, developing a plan, and then addressing some of the change management aspects that you spoke about in terms of deploying a zero trust model, new access controls, new security controls, etc. Noam, how would you answer that question?
First, I have a quick question for Don. As a CMMC certified individual, would you recommend that as a approach for all, or only for a subset of people who say are focused on the federal space?
Well, it's a set of requirements for doing business with Department of Defense. And there are 5 different levels. I think that they're fairly broadly applicable, but I wouldn't put yourself through that pain and agony unless Department of Defense contracts are a major part of your revenue. Companies probably have enough other compliance requirements outside of CMMC, which probably at the level 1, the lowest level, overlap pretty significantly with the other compliance requirements. So unless DoD contracts are an essential part of your business, I would not recommend that self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Appreciate that. I have some generic advice, but I want to preface it with the same way that Don started off his answer. Define the problem first. I run a team of solution architects. We are in the business of solutions, and I and the team practice the philosophy is that we don't know if a solution is right if we don't know the problem. So we start with the problem first and then the solution. So I apologize for offering solutions without defining the problem. Please take this and make sure it matches what you're doing. So things that we see often, that repeat often, I assign I call it S3, even though it has nothing to do with with object storage specifically. The S3 are three S's that that are applicable in the storage space for a secure or zero trust implementation. One is separation. So exactly what I mentioned on this slide, where we don't have one big moat, but each instance is its own independent instance with its own credentials and its own security policies and has its own fault domain. Highly recommended. So that don't make yourself everything vulnerable. Separate things so that they're each their own target, and breaching one does not get into any other domain. So that's separation. Second is snapshotting. Use snapshots. Snapshots, when done right, are also immutable. They're read only. They cannot be changed ever. So you use that. Snapshots are very space efficient. They're instant to create, instant to recover from. We had a customer in Italy, had a ransomware attack. Everything was encrypted. They contacted us and said, "Hey, is there anything we can do?" We said, "Oh, we looked at the dashboard. You have snapshots turned on. Looks like you have a minute by minute snapshot. So take the most recent one, clone, and you're off and running." And they told us, they later wrote us a note, and they said they were back in business in 11 minutes.
Nice.
Yeah, that's all it took. So use snapshots. And then the last S of the three is severing. Sever the connection, meaning air gap. Do use air gapping because that does protect you. And if you ask, well, how do I back up to something that's air gapped? Well, you have to intermittently open the connection, do the update, and close the connection again. And if you're worried about, well, how do I protect that while it's connected, other than all the standard approaches, well, you may want to have two and alternate. So no one location. So you still always have minimum one location that's air gapped. While you're updating site A, site B is air gapped, and vice versa.
No, Don, thank you for that feedback. Great insights, great input. And look, no zero trust and no ransomware conversation would be worth its weight in gold if you didn't talk about some level of products or architecture or product portfolio. Cisco has a fantastic zero trust technology portfolio. This slide lays out the product line within Cisco, the capability that product line, that technology, could be software as a service, could be platform as a service, et cetera, actually delivers around zero trust, and then how the products actually map to cyber hygiene and cybersecurity program maturity, ranging from basic, intermediate to proactive and advanced. So again, there are technologies out there that are purpose-built that map to zero trust and help you to build a zero trust architecture. We're going to wrap up. I think this has been a fantastic discussion. Gentlemen, I want to thank both of you for participating. Chris McEwen, thank you so much for moderating and assisting with the questions. We're going to do a final QA, see if there are any other outstanding questions. And then I'm going to ask Don and Noam to basically provide any additional takeaways or recommendations. And then we're going to talk about this complimentary offering from Exception.
There is one additional question for Noam. Are there other storage best practices for data security?
I mentioned the three S's, so I think those are key to keep in mind. The other one is the way that the data gets access is through the server. So maybe there's a fourth S, which is make sure that your compute side is locked down and employs zero trust. The storage on its own is not really accessible. It's accessible through a client, and that client is that's your compute.
Thank you. Mark?
Awesome. Don, any final thoughts?
Well, I would say with regard to zero trust, remember, in addition to the points I made earlier, just remember too that it's a means to an end. Your goal is not to be zero trust compliant. Your goal is to make your systems and data more secure. And that's the purpose of zero trust. The purpose of zero trust is not zero trust. The purpose of zero trust is to help your company remain secure and ultimately boost the bottom line.
Well said. Well said. And my big takeaway is, look, this continues to evolve, right? Security models, security programs, postures, technology architecture, they're they're continuing to evolve, and they will continue to evolve based upon the risk, based upon the threats, based upon the malware, right? The exploit kits, the viruses, et cetera, that we see being developed in the dark web and out there in the wild. So just keep that in mind, and stay focused on your business goals and objectives, and try to stay focused on tapping into evolving technology and cyber trends and best practices like we talked about today, that help your organizations grow and help your organizations to become more resilient and stable over time. And with that, Exceptional is offering a complimentary security assessment. So if organizations would like a network vulnerability scan for us to review their technology and their controls, and then provide some recommendations in terms of how to make your organization more resilient and how to defend and protect your organization while moving more towards a zero trust model, please reach out to us at info@exceptional.com. And with that, we're going to wrap. Thank you so much. Please tap into our future panels and webinars and some of the research that we have available on our website. Again, Noam from Zadara, thank you so much. Don from DLT, we appreciate your time, gentlemen.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
You guys.
Thank you. Thank you.